Today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Maureen Sherbondy, author of The Body Remembers. Welcome, Maureen.
Thanks for having me here, Terry. I really appreciate it.
I am so excited to have you. I want everyone to understand I don't normally read poetry, and Maureen has a book of poetry, and she's persuasive, so she convinced me that perhaps I would like to at least see what I thought, and I do have to say that I really enjoyed it. But before we dive in, what are readers going to get when they read this volume of poetry?
The reactions I've had so far, because I did do a reading through Zoom recently, is that people found the work accessible and they connected to it. Even the men in the audience, even though their bodies are quite different, they also connected to it and made them gain an understanding of women and how the body influences everything we do in our lives. So I think that women and men will relate to this in understanding how the mind and the body are connected in our human behavior.
Absolutely. So I said, I'm not a poet. I don't normally read poetry. I tend not to understand poetry. That's my problem, is when I'm reading poetry, I feel like it's doing this. And there are people in the room who go, oh, wow. And I'm thinking, what? And it makes me feel stupid. I think maybe that's why I don't care for poetry, is I often feel like it's on some level that I have yet to attain. What tips do you have for readers who are trying poetry? Especially if it's the first time, or if it's the first time since they were forced to do it in high school and didn't understand it then?
See, let me address being forced to do it in high school. This is the problem. People have almost a repulsive reaction when they're not used to hearing poetry or reading poetry. And that has to do with how poetry was brought into the classrooms. So when I taught, I've taught at workshops I taught at a community college in North Carolina for 10 years. I tried to sort of curate my own collection of poems written by a lot of contemporary poets. I included rap poetry, poetry from different backgrounds, more accessible poetry that connects to the audience. And that was the problem with how poetry was presented in the classroom when everyone was little. So you're not the only person who has felt this way. Don't be frightened by poetry. You just have to find the right poetry to read and to listen to. And I read widely, and I suggest that even fiction writers might enjoy reading poetry once they find the right poets to connect to.
Right.
But as for some tips, it's really about what you individually, as a writer or an audience member or as a reader, connect to. What is it that you want to write about? It's the same way that we pick out novels online or in a bookstore. There are different genres. I don't read mysteries usually. I'll read women's fiction. I'll read literary fiction. But we all have our own wheelhouse,
Yes.
the genres that we connect to. And I do believe that reading poetry kind of can feel like a gut punch. So you just need to seek out the poets and the poems that feel like that to you.
I think that's right. It's interesting. The only poetry that I've ever read that I enjoyed was children's poetry, because to me, they're not trying to be, I don't know, super flowery and not understandable. It's for children, and they're trying to make it like super accessible. But I have a daughter who has Asperger's, so she's on the spectrum. And as a little girl, I tried reading some children's poetry to her to help her start to understand language and the nuances of language and communication. And we had some really funny times with that. As poetry, she likes things to be very straightforward, and poetry often is not. And so there was one with Shel Silverstein's poem about the attic, and she was just frustrated that attic light was on. If there's no one up there, it shouldn't be on. If there is someone up there, we should know who it is. And so it's funny because in a lot of ways, watching her frustration with poetry helped me understand kind of mine, that sometimes it's not very straightforward and it feels a little scary to try to figure out, well, what did the author mean?
Well, I think that when you're listening to poetry, just try to relax. You're not given an assignment to write an analysis paper on it. There are certain lines you will connect with and certain ones you won't. I love when an audience member has an aha moment. Like, oh, that's exactly the image that works to express what I've been feeling. So it's interesting. Your daughter probably wouldn't understand the figurative language,
right?
Where one thing represents something else, metaphors, similes, and so on. But I started out loving Dr. Seuss. And I think all kids love to have the repetition and the rhyming.
Right.
And that makes it kind of joyful for children. And then they become scared of poetry once we get away from that, because they say, wait a second, this doesn't have the end rhymes like I'm used to in Dr. Seuss.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I agree. So when I reviewed The Body Remembers, one of the first things I said is I'm not qualified. Like, I am not qualified to review poetry because I don't understand things like structure and techniques and sound devices and all of the things that other people who review poetry talk about. But what I said is that I do know how it made me feel. And that as I read your poems, I did feel things. So let's talk a little bit about how you create poetry. Do you start with things like the structure and the techniques and the sound devices? Do you start more with feelings and then like edit into the structure? I'm curious how that works for you.
So the experience of writing poetry, since I write fiction as well, and they are quite different as experiences, I tend to think visually. I actually, like when I'm writing fiction, I'm like a camera just watching a scene, and then I'm writing it down. Okay. With poetry, it feels more like a dream state, a waking dream state, where I've shut off the editor in my head and things happen that seem very surreal in my poetry. I just allow it all to come in, much like a dream. When you're dreaming, you have a lack of awareness that it's an altered state. So I would kind of mention that my poetry, it feels like I'm in an altered state and I'm just writing down what drops in my head, sometimes starting with an image, but there's also a rhythm to poetry. So along with the image that drops into my head, I can hear a beat. And that's where it is very different from writing a short story or a novel. There are crossovers, though. There is figurative language used in good short story and novel writing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And I think that looking at a poem and thinking about, well, why did that work? Why was that interesting to me? Why did I feel something? It might be useful to go through a line and pick out a metaphor or a symbol, trying to figure out how it worked, and then have a crossover with your own writing. If you're a literary fiction writer, if you're writing short stories, because you will also use strong images and metaphors in good writing of any kind. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. I definitely agree. Talk with me about editing in poetry?
Okay. And I didn't quite finish your question. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Poets sometimes go off on tangents a little bit because that's
all people go off on tangents.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I don't just write a draft with that image that falls in my head, my waking dream state. I then will put it away, which is a great editing suggestion for any kind of writing.
Absolutely.
Take it out a day or a week later or 2 weeks later. And then I will consider the form, because form is really important in writing poetry. The form, how you arrange it on the page, which would include things like stanza breaks, where the line stops, and so on. Does it make sense? Does it benefit the content of the poem? Okay. So for example, if you've read Allen Ginsberg, I actually got to meet Allen Ginsberg back at Rutgers, which was really exciting. He would often have, he was a beat poet. He had rants. A lot of his poems included rants. And he might have one long stanza with really unique, crazy language that worked for that poem. It felt like a rant. He had something to say. It was often political, or it was about sexuality or something else. So some forms will be one long piece. It's called a stanza. So stanzas work like paragraphs work in writing fiction. And then some poems will benefit from breaks between the stanzas. So I look at things very visually with poetry. I like to see it on the page. And then I spend a lot of time editing it to figure out, do I need to have 4 stanzas of equal length? After a while, it kind of happens organically. I've been writing since I was 8 years old. Yeah. So to actually then analyze how I go about editing for something like the form, how it's laid out on the page, I do it kind of automatically now. So it is interesting to talk about it. Poetry, I'd say how it's really different from prose writing is every single word carries so much weight. Now, there are some long epic poems, that take up a whole, book, right? Yeah. But a lot of my poems are short. They might be, one page, right? Right. So every single word has the responsibility of doing something interesting. And that's a lot of pressure. So I use a thesaurus a lot. Sounds really important too, how the sounds play off each other from line to line. It's not as common these days to have end rhymes. So where you add musicality to the poem, to the language, is by the repetition of vowels and consonants in your work. Yeah. So what I'll do is part of the editing, especially when I'm getting near the end, because I'll edit several times for one poem. I will record myself, listen. I can hear where a word doesn't fit. Like this one does not belong. It's too long. It sounds too technical for this poem. And I will work on the nuances of the sounds. And you have to have an ear for that. It's like listening to music, I guess. Music.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would be like, I'm sure like writing a song and then realizing that just doesn't quite flow. Yes. And even as a novelist, I have read my work out loud. Mm-hmm. And you're reading a paragraph and and it's like, ooh, but it felt like it twisted up on my mouth. Yeah. And I couldn't, or the sentence felt too short, too choppy, or maybe it just felt too long. Like it just went on forever. And it was like, that just doesn't do what I need it to do. And in particular, I noticed that when I'm working with dialogue. When I'm thinking about how would my character be speaking these words. And I've gone back before and thought that character would never use that word. They would just never use that word. That's not a word that's going to be in their natural vocabulary. And I have to pull that out and try something else. So it's a similar kind of thing, except yours is more a little more nuanced just because of the poetry nature of it.
Yes, but you make a really good point. I don't just read my poems out loud. My poor husband, who's a writer and an English teacher in Raleigh, I'm writing a young adult novel. This was a young adult novel I had published by Black Rose Writing. Came out during the pandemic, unfortunately. But my process, I think I'm on page 225 right now, and my goal of the rough draft for my young adult novel is to get to page 300, and then I'll revise as we do for a long period of time. But my poor husband, he comes home from teaching, and most days I'll write 3 to 5 pages for my novel because I'm working like 2 other jobs right now, and he listens or he reads it to me.
Yes.
And even when I'm reading it to him, I can hear the problems. So I have my computer open and I am revising as I'm reading it.
Yeah.
And then he's kind of like my cheerleader. He'll just say, go on, continue. Now, he might ask me questions because I don't want to have terrible missteps in my plotting at this point in this rough draft. And he'll say, oh, well, what happened to that other character?
So when you said yesterday.
Yeah. So I think recording or reading or having someone read to you, whether it be poetry or short story or a novel, is so useful in the editing process.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So one of my favorite poems was C-section Scar. And I believe you have that there, and I'm hoping you'll read it. In fact, why don't you go ahead and read it now, and then I'll talk about it in just a minute.
Okay. C-section Scar. The throbbing begins 10 years later, whenever my son falls down at camp or bumps his arm against a pole at school. That shut window from where he reached out to the world swells and reddens as if a small messenger were left behind, like a telephone line to bring in his pain.
And and it just gives me goosebumps when you, especially when you read it out loud, you do it so well. It's amazing to me because I've had 4 children. I've never had a C-section, but I understand the connection with a child. And I can imagine this idea of, the pain that you had bearing him, and now you have a scar that shows it. Right. And that scar somehow signals his pain. I mean, I can feel that connection as a woman. And that's when I realized that maybe I don't have to be a poet or understand poetry terms to realize that I can like poetry just because.
Right. So that I appreciate that, those comments. And I think all women, even if they have not birthed children, will relate to the poems in this book because other things happen to the body. I write about, surgeries I've had in my uterus and other types of body surgeries. In my family, things just grow on us. I don't quite understand it. My dad, who passed away many years ago, he had pillar cysts. I never know how to say it. And I have a really prolific head. I have probably had 14 or 15 of these giant growths on my head. And I have a lot of hair. I don't know if you're listening or you can see this. But the first doctors who removed my cysts believed that to avoid infection, they had to cut off hair. So I started to have these little bald spots, which is upsetting. I mean, there are worse things to have, and they do biopsies after they, remove these, but typically they're fine. And then I always had a lot of female problems too, like a lot of us have. So
right. No, and I really enjoy that. I'm curious, what was your favorite poem in this, and then why?
So I guess I do like the one that you liked as well. A lot of them have great meaning for me. But the one I'm most proud of is actually the longest poem in the book. It's called Speculum. And it's very long for me. Most of my poems are a page. I believe in conciseness of language and getting just the right image and the sounds and everything. But the reason I like Speculum so much is it surprised me as a writer. And if your work is surprising you as a writer, you know there's something interesting there. And I've had people hear this poem now and they say the same thing. Even though I thought it was a serious poem, a few people said, it's actually really funny because of stuff that just pops up in the middle of the poem, the images. It's kind of a combination of thought processes and things that have happened. And it was the hardest poem to revise, I think, maybe because of its length, maybe because it was so very different than a lot of my other poems.
I think that sometimes that surprising piece is fun. You know, and to have a poem or two that's a little different, a little outside of your normal box. I think, I don't know how you feel, but as an author, I enjoy testing my limits, trying new things, testing to see what I can do, what I can't do, how it feels, changing voice, doing those kinds of things. So so that's probably why you like it, is it was something that was different enough that you had to really explore who you were as an author as you got that down.
Right. And the same thing happens with writing my novel. Recently, my characters are just taking over and doing weird things. And
that's what characters are prone to do.
But I love to get to that point where I sort of lose control of what's happening. And there is a life beyond that I incited, I guess, but they're just continuing this little theatrical thing and ending up in weird places and weird situations and saying stuff that shocks me. So I don't even feel like I'm writing it anymore.
So I feel the same way. And when I try to explain it to someone who does not write or does not create in some way, they always look at me like I need medication. And,
yes.
Right. And potentially I do. I'm not saying, one way or the other, but I don't think that this makes it so. I would love, there's a very scientific part of me in addition to my very creative part. And I wish that I could see what's actually happening, watch how my brain is firing and figure out what is happening when that happens. Because
so you could push a button and make it happen all the time.
Well, I just want to see because it feels to me as an author, it feels as if I have characters living in my head who are doing things on their very own without any input from me. And I am merely recording it.
Right.
And if that's true, I want to know it. Are there really people living in there? I don't know. I would just love to see how that works. So it's interesting that you have that same kind of thing happen.
I'm guessing it's almost like a muscle that you have trained over the years, because this didn't happen when I started writing fiction. True. And I imagine people like Joyce Carol Oates, I don't think she sleeps because she's prolific, but I imagine she is just typing these stories at this point because
just keep coming. They just keep coming, right?
They won't stop, They don't. She just probably wakes up and is typing like this. I had you have to be careful. I found out though. I had this funny thing happen. I bumped into one of my best writer friends once at a store, and we were shopping together. And we get online, and I'm talking about this novel in progress, and I said, "Yeah, I can't believe her husband shot, the other person." And the poor cashier is listening like we're talking about something that just happened. And I had to look at him and say, "Oh, we're writers."
Writers, yeah. It's all in our heads. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have felt the same way that if anyone really took a good look at what I Google, they would either be very concerned, very confused. They may arrest me. I'm not sure, because I have some weird things that it's I wonder what would happen if.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen in my novel in progress. One of the surprises that happened is my character woke up tied in a closet, and she'd been roofied, and I don't know anything about roofied.
Right.
I know it's like the slang term. So
Right.
I had to,
It's some drug in a drink is what I understand, right? That's about what I
right.
know. Yeah.
So I had to do this deep dive on Google, and I'm like, boy, I hope I should clear my cache on my computer. Like if someone looked this up, they'd think I was like doing something weird.
Weird. I know. Isn't
No.
that crazy?
Yeah.
So Maureen, when someone puts this volume down and they what do you want them to have walked away with?
When someone puts my The Body Remembers, this is the cover, by the way, very provocative. I want them to have an experience like you shared with me, like, oh, wow, that's how I felt, but I could never express myself. That says it so well. It's when I give a reading at a bookstore or elsewhere, and then people come up to me afterwards and want to talk about a specific poem or their own experience, that makes me feel wonderful. That's what I hope. I wrote a book of poems called The Art of Departure, about going through divorce and other types of departures. And I got a lot of email with commentary about how, they really connected to that because they had gone through a divorce. So anytime I can connect with human beings, it makes me feel like I've done something important. So that's my hope for all of my writing, honestly, not just my poetry books, my fiction as well.
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about next, that you have a young adult novel coming out, right? Is that young adult?
Yes. I don't know if it's going to come out or where. So,
but it's what you're working on.
Yes,
do you have any other projects that you're working on in addition to the young adult novel?
Yeah, I'm a good juggler. I had 3 kids in 3 years, sons, by the way, who climb and, vanish really quickly. I had 3 kids in diapers at the same time, 3 kids in college. So I'm a good multitasker, as you have to be with being a writer. You have to market and you have to get your work sold. And so I have some work coming out, some short stories and literary journals. I have this poetry book coming out October 14th. I also have another manuscript of a poetry book that I've been working on. I'm kind of waiting on publishing that or sending it out to publishers because like I said, I'm working a few other jobs right now. And the young adult novel, it's probably going to take me about a year to edit it. I would like to try to get a literary agent. I've gone that really upsetting road before. I know how difficult it is in today's market, but that's always sort of my goal, to get an agent who will place me with a bigger press.
Right.
I'm a pretty good marketer because I have a background in sales, but because of all the other things going on in my life, I'd rather not spend too much of my time marketing, honestly, because it takes time away from writing.
I know. Yeah. You have to, there's a lot of balancing. I think people assume that as a writer, you just get to write, and you really don't. There's a lot of things that go on with it, and it's writing is one portion of it. And it isn't even just the creative writing, because then you have all the editing, which actually for me uses a different part of my brain. And then there's all of the things that go along with it. So it's crazy.
Right.
Hey guys,
right.
if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. There you're going to have a chance to win a digital copy of The Body Remembers. The Body Remembers. And it's a great book. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, Maureen, talk with you about your poetry or how to write poetry or that kind of thing, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
I have a webpage, www.maureensherbondy.com, Maureen, Sherbondy, one word, SHERBONDY.com. There's a contact page there where people can write messages to me. I do offer workshops. I am going to be giving one in Charlotte in the spring for the Charlotte Writers Group. I'm giving a reading at Flyleaf Bookstore in Chapel Hill in November. The website is one way to reach me. You can order my books through different platforms. I believe Asterism is the distributor, but my publisher, who's wonderful, is Unsolicited Press in Oregon, and they have a web page. Just go to Unsolicited Press, and it'll come up, and you can order my book that way as well.
Fantastic. And guys, I'll have all of that in the show notes, so that'll make it easy for you just to click and follow Maureen. Run out, grab yourself a copy of The Body Remembers. You're not going to be sorry. Even if you're not into poetry, I think you're going to like this. You're going to feel things, and for me, it was validating. It made me feel like what I was feeling was what other people can feel too. And that's kind of a nice thing to know you're not in it alone. But Maureen, I want to thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me on your show. I've really enjoyed this very much. And one final comment. This is shorter than a novel, so if you're pressed for time, you can read it pretty quickly.
Well, and the other thing is it's one of those things you could put on your bedstand and read a poem here and a poem there. It's not like a novel that if you forgot what you read yesterday, that you now can't move forward. You can actually consume these one poem at a time, and it's okay.
Exactly. And it's the same reason I like flash fiction and short stories. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Thank you so much, Maureen.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.